So I do have a slightly different presentation based on my observations and discussions with a lot of the younger nuclear ban treaty supporters. And so although we are gathered to address the risk posed by continuing P5 possession of nuclear weapons, I think it's also important to discuss the risks associated with the P5's preferred discursive strategy in response to the emergence of the nuclear ban treaty. Now, the current line of engagement with the TPNW, I argue, increases the risk of the NPT being perceived as having lost its legitimacy. And such a loss, I believe, threatens the destabilization of the entire nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime, as the NPT is considered to be the core of this regime. Now, I myself, like some of the other young participants involved in nuclear politics, I'm relatively new to this field. And as a result, sometimes when I consider the prospects of nuclear disarmament, my consideration is not necessarily on the basis of a wealth of personal experience. Instead, my consideration relies on an optimistic, almost naive understanding of the experience of predecessors in this field. Now, optimism and the lack of experience might lead young professionals like me to propose pie-in-the-sky alternatives to our current political quagmires. And usually at this point, the more experienced professionals educate us younger ones on how such proposals were tested and perhaps failed in the past. But I think that the optimism which young professionals bring to the field is refreshing, because it forces us as a community to reconsider old proposals in new light and to reconsider them in changed circumstances. And occasionally, when we revisit old proposals in this manner, we might find ourselves questioning why these proposals were discarded in the first place, and we might find some new use for discarded ideas. And so these days, I find myself in scenarios where I have to defend the legitimacy and centrality of the NPT to younger audiences who have only become interested in nuclear politics because of the new and exciting change that the nuclear ban treaty has brought about. And I find that many supporters of the nuclear ban treaty are sick and tired of the idea that nuclear weapons are a source of security and stability. These supporters are disinterested in theories of deterrence, theories that essentially propose the taking hostage of the future of millions of people in a game of high politics. These supporters are disappointed in the perceived failure of the NPT, regardless of its provisions in Article 6 to bring about nuclear disarmament. The expressed disappointment of these supporters is notwithstanding the fact that the NPT has been a phenomenal success in its principal objective of preventing the further proliferation of nuclear weapons beyond the stipulated P5. The positive fact that the world is now free of over 80% of the nuclear weapons that existed during the heights of the Cold War is offset by the unsettling realization that all nuclear weapon states are engaged in comprehensive modernization of their nuclear weapon systems and nuclear delivery vehicles. The fact is that the NPT's record of practical implementation of the 1995, 2000, and 2010 agreed commitments on nuclear disarmament remains very poor. Some issues which highlight this failure include the abrogation of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the failure to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in national security policies, a reversal of global reductions in nuclear weapons stockpiles, the abandonment of the INF Treaty, and the jeopardization of a future successor to the New START Treaty, given the recent developments between Russia and Ukraine. The entry into force of the CTBT is still held up by a few states for reasons almost impossible to resolve. The Fissile Material Cut-off Treaty has yet to be negotiated. And the once accepted understanding that new nuclear supply arrangements must require full-scope IAEA safeguards as a condition of supply has been disregarded, as we have seen with the case of India, a non-NPT state which was provided nuclear fuel cycle items in violation of the treaty. Now, this may be simple reasoning on my part, but it appears that at this point, the mere fact that all of these developments have happened while the NPT has been in force makes the NPT appear unable to provide the environment that will bring about nuclear disarmament. From this line of reasoning, the NPT has failed, and we need to turn to the TPNW to bring about nuclear disarmament instead. From this line of reasoning, the NPT's days are numbered. But the thing is, this line of argument is not perceived as simple in other circles. In recent times, some notable activists and academics have boldly issued calls and written authoritative articles on why states need to ditch the NPT. On the other hand, the TPNW is rejected by nuclear weapon states and their allies on the grounds that it is incompatible with the NPT, that it does not lead to the elimination of a single nuclear weapon, that it does not include verification, and that it has created an unnecessary distraction from the work of the NPT. Additionally, we have P5 representatives also aggravating this divisive climate by not only failing to meaningfully engage with the emergent nuclear ban treaty, but by going further to dismiss and caricature its advocates. This development is not only unhelpful for the perceived legitimacy of the NPT, but I believe it's also remarkably short-sighted. This approach sacrifices the potential benefits of sustained dialogue, and it obliterates the prospects for synergistic evolution of the NPT and the TPNW in the future. And this brings me to my main recommendation for P5 states, which is rather simple. The P5 need to do more to bring the nuclear ban treaty more in line with the NPT's stated Article 6 goals. Looking at the NPT's articles, one common feature is that this treaty is not a self-implementing treaty. NPT Article 3 on safeguards requires the conclusion of comprehensive safeguard arrangements and agreements with the IAEA. Article 6 on nuclear disarmament is in part fulfilled by other treaties such as the CTBT or the proposed Fissile Material Cut-off Treaty. Article 4 on nuclear energy requires technical cooperation and supply arrangements through the IAEA. And Article 7 requires and permits states to negotiate nuclear weapons-free zone treaties. Therefore, I propose that P5 states begin to see the TPNW in the same vein as an expansion of Article 6 provisions of the NPT. Now, looking more closely at the nuclear ban treaty text, it is clear that despite the divisive rhetoric that is sometimes employed by activist groups to ramp up popular support for nuclear disarmament, the nuclear ban treaty text closely mimics and sometimes explicitly references the NPT as a source of authority. A section on the nuclear ban's preamble, for example, reaffirms that the full and effective implementation of the NPT, which serves as the cornerstone of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime, has a vital role to play in promoting international peace and security. There are also explicit references to the IAEA in Article 3 on safeguards and Article 4 on the nuclear ban's operational provisions. So there is some synergy to work with. However, it is only in this acceptance of the nuclear ban treaty as a reality that some of the multifaceted relationships between the nuclear ban and the NPT become more apparent and ultimately more manageable. You see, the supporters of the nuclear ban treaty are not ideologically monolithic, and many states joined the ban treaty for various reasons. Chief among these were to create an international legal instrument to stigmatize the continued reliance on nuclear weapons. However, if one takes a more practical and perhaps more cynical approach, we find that there are other reasons for nuclear ban support which are not universally shared by all state parties to the treaty. One reason of support has to do with retributive justice seeking. As the humanitarian initiative demonstrated, the states which suffered the abhorrent consequence of nuclear weapons testing were yet to experience any significant P5 actions that indicated a willingness to acknowledge and rectify their wrongdoings in this regard. Thus, the Nuclear Ban Treaty serves as a starting point to a much more substantial forum for retribution. Another reason for support lies in the vulnerability of those Western European states which are not part of any nuclear umbrellas or security alliances. These Western states are caught between nuclear-armed alliances and have little means beyond unilateral declarations to assert their neutrality. And so states like Austria, for example, which through their 1999 Federal Constitutional Act for a non-nuclear Austria, have sought to assert positive neutrality. However, it is clear that such a unilateral declaration would not amount to anything, as the transboundary effects of nuclear use cannot be controlled in the event of even a limited nuclear conflict in Europe. And so taken together, these retributive justice seekers and the positive neutral states form the core of support for the nuclear ban treaty. Yet, all these states combined do not have the numbers required to push for a near universal nuclear ban treaty. And so to attain the numbers that will bring about a universal treaty, these states had to act in solidarity with their counterparts from the global south. The fact that around 83% of countries in the global south already belong to regional nuclear weapons free zones and thus do not share the same proximal security concerns is interesting. Yet these states were comfortable enough to go along with the humanitarian initiative and support it, and also support the nuclear ban route to disarmament, despite other competing proposals, such as those proposed by the non-aligned movement. I must remind all of us at this point that many of the states in the global south are developing states with developmental interests, which they must also protect, even as they seek nuclear disarmament. Many of these developing states have been longtime supporters of disarmament, precisely because they view nuclear disarmament not as an end in itself, but as a precursor to an international system within which only the positive benefits of nuclear technologies can be exploited. Thus, the TPNW is actually sensitive to the idea of development through the pursuit of nuclear energy. The TPNW preamble states that nothing in this treaty shall be interpreted as affecting the inalienable right of its states parties to develop research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without discrimination. And this is not to say that all supporters of the ban treaty also support the use and spread of nuclear energy. Ambassador Lonsky indicated Austria's opposition to viewing nuclear energy as a sustainable means of development in his country's most recent statement to the IAEA General Conference last year. And some civil society organizations, such as the UK-based Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, have also launched campaigns against nuclear energy and issued a petition calling on the UK government to end all nuclear energy production immediately. Yet, without compromise and taking the desire for nuclear energy into account, it is highly unlikely that the 66 non-aligned movement signatories would have supported the nuclear ban treaty. After all, we witness an increased rate of IAEA integrated nuclear infrastructure reviews requested by ban treaty signatories, even while the nuclear ban was gaining steam in the UN. Looking at some of the positions taken by state parties from the Global South, it is clear that the nuclear ban's reassuring language on nuclear energy was essential to ensure the support of the majority of states. States who cherish their inalienable rights to pursue nuclear energy for development. Thus, I will consider this new understanding of nuclear disarmament as an opportunity for P5 states and for those interested in highlighting the synergies between the NPT and the TPNW to begin a more comprehensive dialogue. I would also state that this understanding of the developmental interests of states in the nuclear ban treaty serves as food for thought for those who propose that we ditch the NPT. Ditching the NPT might affect these cherished inalienable rights, which are exclusively encoded in Article 4 of the NPT. And so overall, I believe that numerous opportunities exist where the emergence of the TPNW becomes an expansion of the global nuclear order, where the nuclear ban treaty is rightly viewed as a positive development towards the fulfillment of NPT obligations, and where the nuclear ban can actually become a tool within which advanced dialogue on the particularities of eventual nuclear disarmament can be had between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states alike. Thank you very much.